Morning. How are you?
Good morning, Ambassador Bolton. Good to see you again. Thank you for,
Uh,
for your time.
no, thanks for asking.
Let's start immediately. We're 6 months into Trump's second presidency. How do you judge his results in first half of the year?
Well, I think he's had more success domestically than he has internationally. He got what's called the reconciliation bill through Congress very narrowly, but he got a lot of his priorities. In fact, many people are saying they don't know what his legislative priorities will be after that. But in the international field, obviously, with the huge worldwide controversy over the tariffs that still up in the air, still causing a lot of uncertainty. And he's obviously failed at some of the things that he said he would do during the campaign, some of which weren't going to happen, like getting a ceasefire in Ukraine in 24 hours. But he's now been at it for 6 months, and the war continues. I think more success in the Middle East. I think it was the right thing to do to join Israel in attacking Iran's nuclear weapons program. But of course, that conflict, really region-wide conflict, continues. So it's a very mixed record at best, I would say.
So you think it'll continue in the same tone and a bit of chaotic tone with some successes, but some failures, which he will try to represent as great successes? Or do you think something will change compared to these first 6 months?
No, I think his pattern is pretty clear. It was clear in the first term. It's even more clear now. It is chaotic, and that will not change. You know, a lot of decisions that he made in the first term when I was national security advisor, I agree with, still agree with. Some I disagreed with, but even the ones I agreed with, we got to by a pretty circuitous path. And when the president doesn't think strategically, when he just goes kind of day to day, that's not the best way to look out long term for American interest. And I think if anybody wants any proof of how that kind of operation makes what's in some cases already a bad situation worse, the handling of the tariffs, I think, proves it very graphically. Right now, we see apparently some agreements beginning to come in, but they also appear to be headline agreements with a lot of details to be filled in. So the markets are happy that finally we're getting some certainty, but also now we're going to see the real economic impact of tariffs, which, if past tariff wars are any indication, will leave everybody worse off.
It seems like we're not heading towards a deal, a trade deal between US and the EU. It seems more likely that we're heading towards a trade war with measures and countermeasures as we are approaching the August 1st deadline. What do you expect on that front? Allies waging a trade war, that's not a good thing in itself.
No, it's going to hurt everybody's economy, and I don't think this needed to happen at all. I think there's some inequities in trading arrangements. You can work them out privately, and if you have a real problem, as Ronald Reagan did sometimes, then you apply tariffs on a one-time basis to say we're very serious about this. You don't go to war with the entire world. I mean, I think the worst actor in international trade these days is China, and it has been for a long time. I think everybody is victimized by the way China operates, and the way perhaps to deal with that behavior is to get your biggest trading partners, your friends and allies, and say, look, we're all being taken advantage of. Let's act together to try and change China's behavior. But it's pretty hard to change China's behavior when you're struggling against all of your friends and allies.
It's still not the case today that Trump is approaching the issue with this approach that you just described, rallying allies to confront China on trade. It's still the case that he's, he's waging a trade war against everyone, even Europeans. No.
Right. Well, it's given China an opportunity to make inroads in a lot of places where I think we had a pretty decent shot at getting stronger support on a whole range of things, not just trade issues in Southeast Asia, for example, where many of the countries are alternatives to production in China. But Xi Jinping has toured through Southeast Asia to say, look, we're all in this together. We're all being mistreated by the United States. We can correct that, I think, but all of this is unnecessary. We didn't have to go through this. I mean, particularly in the case of North America, in his first term, Trump renegotiated NAFTA. He called it a big success. I think there were some improvements, some updates that were necessary to NAFTA. There's some things in it that USMCA that I think were moved in the wrong direction, but by and large, everybody concluded it was a better deal for all three of the countries involved. And now Trump is basically saying, "I want to go back over and do it all again." It's not a way that is conducive to long-term economic growth for anybody.
We'll get to the issue of Ukraine and Iran more in more detail soon. But let me just ask you about your impressions of how NATO summit went in The Hague. I know your book deals a lot with Brussels summit, in which Trump threatened to pull US out of NATO. It seems like this time the summit was a success. It seems like the flattering was organizing principle of the whole summit. Maybe the flattery is the only tool that is the only glue that is still holding NATO together. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, is it a sign of strength or a sign of weakness of NATO?
Well, it's certainly a success to get past the summit without some catastrophe taking place. And I do think there was progress. The allies agreed to move real defense spending to 3.5%. There's a 5% figure, but that the 1.5% on infrastructure and so on is pretty amorphous. But 3.5% is not a bad target. Trump's own defense budget for the next fiscal year for the United States doesn't increase over the last year, so he's not even moving toward 3.5%, which is a mistake. But and it does relate to Ukraine, but it is a good thing that he came away from the summit feeling that he had been supported, and so now there are only 3 more summits to go to worry about.
So do you think that deep down inside, his views, his feelings about NATO as an alliance have changed, or is it just superficial?
I think it's superficial. He doesn't understand how the alliance works. He basically thinks we defend Europe, that we get nothing out of it, and they don't pay for it. So if I thought NATO worked that way, I wouldn't be a supporter of NATO either. But that's not how it works. That's not what collective defense alliances are all about. If they're working well, and I think NATO is, we're all more secure because of the deterrent value of the collective defense relationship.
Since the beginning of his second term, you've been saying that Trump has put the US on the wrong side of Russian-Ukraine war, of Russian invasion on Ukraine. Do you think he's now slowly moving to the right side? There are some signals that he lost patience with President Putin, which he tried to befriend.
Right. He did certainly say he was unhappy with Putin, but also that he had not given up on him. And I think he still thinks he's his friend. He probably wonders why his friend didn't help him get a ceasefire. It was never going to happen in 24 hours, as he promised during the campaign. But I think Putin, for many months after the inauguration, was playing Trump along like a good KGB agent knows how to run one of his spies. But I think Putin may have pushed the envelope a little bit too far, and that's what caused Trump to decide he would agree to deploy Patriots via the NATO allies to Ukraine. But I also think that Trump looks at this 6 months of an effort to find a ceasefire to the Ukraine war as a failure, and what he's really doing now is trying to extricate himself from the war, both diplomatically and militarily. I hope that's not true, but by giving Putin a 50-day deadline and then threatening sanctions that the market doesn't believe and I don't think the Kremlin believes, I think he's leaving himself a lot of time to find a reason not to get more involved. We don't really have an answer on military assistance from the U.S. to Ukraine, whether it will be continued or not. The Patriots, as I say, was the right decision, but it doesn't tell you one way or the other whether additional assistance will be transmitted. And that's obviously the key question.
So what do you think will happen after the 50-day deadline expires?
Well, as we've seen in the case of many of the trade negotiations, deadlines come and go. Maybe they get extended. It gives Trump flexibility. He was in a bad place. He wants to get out of it. He doesn't want to look like he's abandoning Ukraine because he would be heavily criticized for that, and rightly so. So the Patriots give him cover, and for Trump, 50 days is a long time. Who knows what will happen?
I mean, does Putin still feel emboldened by President Trump's moves? Do you think Putin still sees a path to victory? We've seen the new developments on the front lines where Russians are winning some battles.
From my point of view, I think for most outside observers, they would say, yes, it's true that Russia is making advances on the ground, but at a terrible human cost to the army. And that's the way they've been fighting the war almost since February 2022 when they invaded. The calculus of human life is just not the same for them as it is for others. So Putin may feel that he's still closer to victory than in a war of attrition. Russia's 3.5 times bigger than Ukraine. Ultimately, they will prevail. So I don't see things changing. To us, it looks mostly like gridlock. And the fact we've never come up with an adequate strategy for Ukraine. We've provided a lot of resources, but never helped them work out a winning strategy and then decide what resources are necessary. So I do think Putin thinks he's winning. You can agree or disagree with that, but that's how the Kremlin sees it, and I think that means they will continue the war.
And do you think Trump sometimes he leaves an impression that he's more interested in dividing Europe and the wider world with Putin and some other players like that into spheres of influence? We certainly, or some people certainly had that impression that he's more interested in that at the beginning of his second term. Do you still think he's tempted by the idea of let's allow Russians run their own sphere of interest in part of Europe, and we'll have our own spheres?
Well, I think that's too complex for him to think about. I don't think he sees the world that way. I do think a lot of what he said at the beginning of the first term has disappeared. Thankfully, we're not talking about invading Canada anymore and making it the 51st state or Greenland or the Panama Canal. I don't know where he gets some of these ideas, but they come and go. And he just doesn't know much about the rest of the world. In his first term, he asked John Kelly, who was his chief of staff at the time, is Finland still part of Russia? He asked Theresa May when we met with her at Chequers, the British Prime Minister's resident, after the famous Brussels NATO summit, when one of her advisors talked about Britain being a nuclear power, and Trump looked at Theresa May and said, "Oh, do you have nuclear weapons?" So, when you're dealing with somebody who has that limited knowledge, it's more a function that he feels very uncomfortable in many of these situations. It's just unfamiliar territory for him. He knows now more than he did in the first term, but still not very much.
Let's move to Middle East. You were obviously happy with strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities happening. You always advocated for U.S. to strike Iran's nuclear weapons program, but you were not happy when it ended. You thought it should have gone towards regime change. Do you still think that regime change in Tehran is possible, or?
Yeah, I think the regime is extremely unpopular for a lot of reasons. The economy has been in bad shape for almost a decade. The people feel that the Ayatollahs and the top generals in the Revolutionary Guard are engaged in a lot of corruption and self-dealing. They and their families are getting rich. The people are not getting rich. The young people, 60% of the population's under 30. They don't like the regime. They know they could have a different life. Different ethnic groups, the Kurds, the Azeris, Arabs, Balukis, 40% or more of the population, they're very unhappy. And the women are unhappy and have been since the murder of Masi Amini, the young Kurdish lady who was killed for violating the dress code. And there were big demonstrations on that, pretty brutally put down 2 years ago. The trouble is the opposition's not well organized, but people are very unhappy. And I think there's a lot of dissent inside the top ranks of the government. They've taken a terrible pounding from Israel. Their terrorist proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah in particular, have been badly damaged. The Assad regime in Syria has been overthrown. Iran itself has lost its ballistic missile production capabilities, and now the nuclear program is badly hurt. The air defenses are gone. The people know the government can barely defend itself. So it's a very unstable situation. And if there were more fragmentation at the top, I think the regime could come apart. Obviously, it hasn't happened yet, but the seeds of it are there.
But also regime change is a risky policy that can backfire, as we've seen in Iraq and Libya. And then Trump's views on I mean, America First policy was created in opposition to regime changes around the world, especially after what happened in Iraq. So how to reconcile these two risk and then potential benefits for the region?
Well, I don't think Trump himself wants regime change in Iran. He's basically said that, but the fact is now, having crossed the red line about whether to attack Iran or not, we've done it. And contrary to what Trump says, the nuclear program there was not totally and completely obliterated. It's just not true. It was badly damaged, but if the Iranians try to put it back together, the Israelis have made clear they will not sit idly by and let that happen. And Trump himself said a few days ago he would not rule out further attacks on Iran. So the game is on. It's not like Iran is just going. It just starts again on a new page. They've been badly weakened, and the dynamics of power in the Middle East have been changed. Israel is much stronger. The U.S. is much stronger. Iran is much weaker. I think the people inside Iran, there's a feeling. What I hear from reports that the feeling the regime may be on its last legs. I don't want to overstate that, but they can see, as I said, the regime can't even protect its own generals and top ayatollahs and nuclear scientists, some of whom the Israelis killed in their beds during the war. That's how penetrated the Iranian government is. So I think there's still a lot to play out here. It may await the death of the Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader. You know, they've only had two supreme leaders. That means they've had one transition. So that's a time when an authoritarian regime has to pick the new leader when I think it's most vulnerable, when the stakes are high inside. That may be what precipitates it coming apart.
Yeah, you yourself were a target of alleged assassination attempt or efforts by Iranian Revolutionary Guard efforts to kill national security officials from Trump's first term. Do you believe Iran tried to assassinate Donald Trump himself, as some were speculating?
Well, there's no doubt he was at the top of the list, and I think the threat continues. In his case, the FBI arrested a Pakistani national who was trying to hire assassins against Trump in the weeks before the election last November. They unsealed the charges after the election, but the pattern was very similar to the one involving the criminal charges against the Revolutionary Guard officer who was trying to hire a hitman to go after me. So they're following the same approach, try and distance themselves from Iran itself. But the threat level, I think, is still the same as it has been. And now, particularly after the U.S. has attacked Iran itself, you certainly can't rule anything out.
If we have time for one more question, let me just ask you, President Trump keeps talking about how he prevented the conflict between Serbia and Kosovo recently. He mentions that in the same breath with preventing India-Pakistan war and Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda war. But almost everyone in this region don't know what he's talking about. Is he referring to the old meeting between Serbian president and then Kosovo prime minister in the Oval Office during the first term, when they signed some kind of agreement that everyone forgot on the next day? Or is he referring to something more recent? And what?
As far as I know, nothing has happened recently. And I was myself involved in the Serbia-Kosovo thing when I was in the White House, where we made an effort along with others, didn't work out. They tried again after I left. That didn't really produce anything either. But what Trump wants is the Nobel Peace Prize. And he thought perhaps he would get it for bringing a ceasefire to Ukraine. Well, that hasn't worked out. He hasn't gotten a ceasefire in Gaza or with Iran yet. So he's looking for other items to put on his resume, and I think that's where the Serbia, Kosovo, India, Pakistan, and Congo, Rwanda situations all came about. In India, they very much resent him saying he brought the conflict or the reaction to the terrorist attack in Kashmir to a halt. They think they did it themselves. So he has both Bibi Netanyahu and the chief of the general staff of the Pakistani military, General Munir, nominating him for the Nobel Peace Prize. Somebody needs to tell him, under the rules of the Nobel Committee, nominations have to be submitted no later than January 31st of the year you want the award to go in. So he's disqualified this year if they follow their rules.
Okay, I won't keep you any longer. I know you're in a hurry. I appreciate your time. Thank you for this, and good luck. And
okay, well, no, thanks very much. Stay in touch. It's still got 3.5 years to go.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.